alleged murder weapon, what exactly did David allegedly use to dismember Celeste? Because prosecutors allege that David ordered 3 chainsaws to this home, but the 2 that were found in the garage in this residence didn't test positive for blood or DNA. Same for an electric saw that was found. There was testimony suggesting that a criminalist posited that if the blades had been used for human dismemberment, they wouldn't have been able to be cleaned to a point where their testing would have resulted in a negative result. And what I'll note about that is the deputy ME, Dr. Ho, testified that certain dismemberment is potentially consistent with chainsaw cuts. So what's the disconnect here? Well, one of the things prosecutors talked about was this 3rd missing chainsaw. And they presented product photos of this Makita brand 10-inch chainsaw, apparently from Home Depot, apparently delivered by Postmates. But detectives confirmed that the chainsaw wasn't at the place. As far as we can tell, they don't have it. I mean, is this the one? Is this the one that he allegedly used to dismember Celeste?
There are 2 chainsaws sitting in an evidence locker right now that came back clean. No blood, no DNA. And prosecutors say there was a 3rd one. That one's missing. That gap alone tells you this is not going to be the easy conviction some people assumed it would be. Welcome back. If you've been following the case against singer David Anthony Burke, you know the headlines already.
I want to do something here. I want to do something very, very specific when it comes to David Anthony Burke, the singer facing first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains charges in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste.
First-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, unlawful mutilation of human remains, all connected to the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Burke has pleaded not guilty, and under the law he remains innocent unless and until a jury says otherwise. That matters because what came out at the preliminary hearing was not the whole case. Prosecutors told the court flat out that what they presented was only a small fraction of their evidence. The judge still found enough to send this to trial, but enough to proceed and enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt are 2 very different legal thresholds.
And even though, yes, the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence, there was enough evidence for this case to move forward, we know that the prosecution doesn't have to present everything they have at a preliminary hearing. And by the way, DA Nathan Hochman said what was presented by our office over the course of the last week is a small but illustrative fraction of the evidence investigators have accumulated that proves defendant Burke is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the brutal murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And B, the bar is so low at a preliminary hearing, right? You just have to show sufficient cause to hold someone over for trial.
That difference is the entire story of this episode. Let's start with what the prosecution does have, because it's substantial. On the sexual abuse charge, a detective testified about sexually explicit material allegedly on Burke's phone and text messages allegedly referencing pregnancy, Plan B, and emergency contraception dating back to November 2023.
He presented some arguably compelling evidence at this preliminary hearing. I mean, when it comes to the continuous sexual abuse charge, in my legal opinion, the prosecution has a lot. If they're trying to prove that David had an illegal sexual relationship with a minor over a period of time, when LAPD detective Corey Farrell was on the stand, he went through all of these alleged sexually explicit photos reportedly on David's phone. I'm not even going to get too specific on this, but basically, it was alleged these were images of the singer engaging in sex acts with Celeste. Naked photos, text messages about Plan B, pregnancy, an abortion, sexual positions, the relationship, emergency contraception. And Farrell says the dates of these conversations with sexual references began all the way back in November of 2023 and continued until March of 2025.
On the dismemberment charge, investigators pointed to chainsaws and cleaning supplies allegedly ordered to the home under an alias, blood evidence in the garage allegedly matching Celeste's DNA, and blue plastic fragments in her remains allegedly consistent with an inflatable pool found at the property. Cell and vehicle data allegedly placed Burke's Tesla traveling to Santa Barbara the night of the alleged killing, where Celeste's ID was later found.
To dispute that, but I'm sure the defense will explore that. We'll see. Now, in terms of the alleged dismemberment charge, unlawful mutilation of human remains, detectives testified about these chainsaws, a mop system, cadaver bags, a blue inflatable pool that were all allegedly ordered to David's home using an alias in the days after Celeste's reported death. How a DNA expert testified that evidence from apparent blood stains in the home's garage were consistent with a DNA match for Celeste, that you had a criminalist testify about mats at David's place that had linear cuts and stains that tested positive for possible blood, evidence of an alleged trash bag with stained wipes, alleged cuts to this blue inflatable pool. how blue plastic fragments found in Celeste's remains are allegedly consistent with the inflatable pool that David reportedly ordered and that was found at David's place. That David's Tesla, where Celeste's remains were found, reportedly had 11 air fresheners in it. How testing found possible traces of blood in the car. Silverman suggests that blood could have leaked from the parked Tesla, soaked through the rubber mats, and reached the bricks underneath. And what about the testimony that allegedly right after this supposed killing, during the night of the 23rd into the morning of the 24th, digital data allegedly shows the Tesla traveling to Santa Barbara? That Celeste's passport card was allegedly found.
That's a real evidence-backed foundation. This isn't a case built on nothing. But here's where the murder charge specifically starts to strain. No surveillance footage of Celeste entering the home. No witness who saw her get out of the Uber. No witness to what happened in the roughly 20-minute window prosecutors say she was killed.
We definitely don't know what happened in that house right now. What came out? Detective Farrell confirms that there was no surveillance video of Celeste or David at the residence that night. There was no presentation of witnesses seeing Celeste enter that home on Doheny Place. And while the prosecution asserts that David arranged for an Uber to pick Celeste up that night to take her to his place, and reportedly there was a text conversation about that, including texts about the address, the Uber's arrival, the gate door being unlocked, apparently the Uber driver could not definitively say that he dropped Celeste off at this house. Detective Farrell testified that nobody saw Celeste get out of the Uber that night. No one testified, as of yet, that they saw the killing or watched Celeste die. There were no witnesses called regarding that specific 20-minute or so period of time, that window.
And critically, no murder weapon was ever recovered. On cross-examination, the deputy medical examiner conceded he couldn't rule out that the fatal wounds happened within seconds of each other and couldn't say for certain who was holding whatever caused them.
Assuming she goes into the house, what happened? How do you know it was first-degree murder with special circumstances? Neither Detective Farrell nor the deputy medical examiner could precisely say what happened. And that is complicated by the fact that no murder
In plain terms,
weapon.
the defense got an expert to admit under oath that the physical evidence alone doesn't tell you who did what to whom.
You know, defense attorney Marilyn Benarski had Dr. Ho establish that he cannot rule out that the two penetrating wounds, which he claimed were the cause of death, occurred within seconds of each other. Quote, you cannot determine whether Ms. Hernandez was holding the knife that caused the two wounds, correct? Correct. You can't rule that out, right? So that is a consideration, but we would expect to find hesitation marks. And then he was asked, is it fair to say that you don't know the circumstances under which these wounds occurred? And he replied, correct. Assuming, of course, it's a knife, right? We don't have the murder weapon.
That's the kind of admission that keeps defense attorneys up at night in a good way, because it opens the door to alternate explanations, and the defense didn't waste it. They pointed to text messages showing Celeste allegedly initiating the meeting, allegedly threatening to expose Burke publicly, and messages the defense says reflect mental health struggles. The implication being floated self-defense or something other than a premeditated killing.
Right. It was reported that the defense attorney asked Detective Farrell if Celeste had a history of domestic violence, whether there were messages referencing alleged mental health issues about Celeste. And while the judge wouldn't permit the presentation of that evidence at this stage of the proceedings, it is possible that could come out at a trial. But you couple that with the text messages or the apparent text messages from April 22nd to the 23rd, 2025. Again, this is the time period that we're talking about, the key moment when Celeste was allegedly killed. These were highlighted by the defense on cross-examination of Farrell. They arguably show that Celeste was demanding to see David before he traveled abroad, that she begged to see him in person, that he tells her no. This would defeat the narrative that he allegedly lured her to the property to kill her. And then Detective
The judge
Farrell
didn't allow all of that evidence in at this early stage, but a preliminary hearing and a trial run by different rules. A lot of what got blocked here could come back in front of a jury. Then there's the timeline problem. The medical examiner testified he could say Celeste had been dead for weeks, but not months, which means he can't actually pin the date of death to April 23rd, the day prosecutors allege the murder happened. If the defense can convince a jury she was alive even a few days past that date, the entire narrative the prosecution built, text messages, the Uber, the alibi text sent 20 minutes later, gets a lot shakier.
From the defense during questioning of the deputy medical examiner. Because when you think about the state of decomposition and dismemberment, that's an issue. Dr. Ho testified that he's willing to say she had been dead for weeks because there are weeks and months, But he couldn't say that she had been dead for months because there are no months and weeks. I know it's a little technical, but in other words, you have a witness who can't say certainly how long Celeste had been dead before her remains were discovered. So he cannot pinpoint the exact date of her death as April 23rd, 2025, based on the autopsy. And if the defense can convince the jury that she was alive past April 23rd, that's going to be
And that missing chainsaw keeps coming back up. Prosecutors showed product photos of a third saw allegedly delivered to the home, but it was never recovered. The two saws that were found tested negative for blood, and testimony suggested that if they'd actually been used to dismember a body, cleaning them enough to beat forensic testing would have been nearly impossible. So if that's true, what was used? Where is it? That's not a small detail to leave unanswered at trial.
Celeste? Because if you don't have the tool, that's a gap. Now, I asked private investigator Steve Fisher about this after the preliminary hearing. He was actually in that preliminary hearing for a bit of it. He had been following the case from the very beginning. Here's what he said about the chainsaw.
Well, the medical examiner said, because of the state of decomp, they can't say for certain exactly like how long of a blade or sharp instrument that was or whatnot. And listen, I think everybody assumes it was probably a knife, but there was a lot of time that passed in between. And so it's mind-boggling to me that there was any evidence such as pool or anything still in that garage. I mean, the stupidity, right? If you're trying to cover this up. And part of me wonders, if he just knew he was going to get caught and was just kind of waiting. Because this was
Do you think the missing chainsaw is the key?
Yeah, I think that chainsaw might be in Santa Barbara.
Really?
I think on the second or third trip, I think he could have been, getting, because if you look at that second trip, they're contending that it happened around May 5th, around Cinco de Mayo. And May 8th, I think he took another trip up there. And that makes me wonder if it was to dispose of things near that lake or something. But I don't know that for sure. I just think that could be a reason that the ID was ultimately found up there as well. It's like a disposal spot. But why he picked that, how he knew.
The defense also went after the legal architecture of the charge itself, specifically the special circumstances that could make this a death penalty eligible case. Their argument: lying in wait doesn't fit if Celeste herself arranged the meeting. Murder for financial gain doesn't fit because a future album deal isn't a settled legal interest under California precedent. Murder of a witness doesn't fit if there's no evidence Celeste ever said she planned to go to police. Whether a jury buys any of that is a separate question. But it tells you exactly where the fight at trial is going to be.
And her argument was neither. And then if you don't have either, there's no murder. Express malice was a deliberate intention to take away a life, and she argued there was no evidence showing deliberate intention here from David. She argued there's no statement of intent anywhere to harm her. There was no history of violence or hostility from him to her. How the relationship, the evidence listed here, is the opposite of homicidal malice. She also argued there was no implied malice. There was no considerable provocation. And she says, counter that, if you look at provocation, it was from Celeste to David, that she was the threatening one. She argued that the three special circumstances allegations that would make this first-degree murder charge eligible for the death penalty are unconstitutionally vague. How lying in wait, you look at the text messages that were presented, would arguably show Celeste called for the meeting during which prosecutors claimed she was killed. There was no surprise attack because she knew and expected David to be home, that he was online playing games when she came over there, or allegedly came over there. The other special
So where does the prosecution go from here? Based on public comments from the DA's office, the expected response is straightforward. Why would someone send a comm a lie by text minutes after allegedly being attacked instead of calling police?
Here's what I think. And this is, by the way, based on my conversation with DA Nathan Hochman on my News Nation show, too. I think I was reading between the lines with what he said. I imagine the prosecution would argue, jury, are you expected to believe that Celeste invites herself over, kills herself, and David thinks that quickly, that only minutes later he sends an alibi text? He doesn't think to call emergency services or the police and tell them what he just witnessed, what just happened? Jury, are you expected to believe he's minding his own business when Celeste violently attacks him, he kills her in self-defense, and then calmly sends an alibi text afterwards? He thinks that quickly? And then allegedly buys all the supplies to allegedly dismember her body? They're going to argue it doesn't make sense.
Why arrange to obtain dismemberment supplies and make an out-of-state trip immediately after? Prosecutors are likely to argue the behavior after the fact speaks louder than the missing physical evidence. That this is a circumstantial case, and circumstantial cases get one at trial all the time.
Again, or does he never contact her again because he killed her, because he knows what happened to her? Prosecution will probably say, we don't need to show you exactly what happened in this house. It's obvious. It's a strong circumstantial evidence case. And you and I both know how many times that we've covered cases here on Sidebar where the prosecution wins on a circumstantial evidence case. But again,
often works isn't always works, and right now there are real documented gaps: no weapon, no eyewitness to the killing itself, an uncertain time of death, and a missing piece of alleged evidence that could be the difference between a conviction and reasonable doubt. Whether the prosecution's promised or additional evidence closes those gaps is the question this case now hinges on. Burke is due back in court for arraignment on August 31st. That's when we'll get a clearer sense of how both sides plan to move forward, and whether a plea deal is even on the table.
That showed a subjective belief that Celeste had any interest in being a witness or participant in any criminal investigation. Did she make it clear that she was going to work with prosecutors or work with police or go to the police? And she argued that all of Celeste's threats were to ruin him socially and professionally. Again, that she never said she was going to go to the police. Now, the prosecution countered that. The judge ultimately ruled there was enough to go forward for trial for now, but I'm highlighting what could be issues at a trial. Look, the next thing that we have to look out for is David's arraignment on August 31st. That's going to be the formal reading of the charges. We'll get a sense of the next steps in this case. Although, let me just call out one more thing. I asked Nathan Hochman on my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, about a plea deal here. Now, I didn't mention, would you consider a deal because of gaps in the case? No, because he feels very confident in the evidence. He knows more about it than I do. He feels very confident that they can find David guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. No, I asked him, if you think about what was just presented at this prelim, the graphic photos of Celeste's dismembered body, the allegedly sexually explicit photos of Celeste, do you want to spare a jury from all that? Do you want to spare the family from all that? He hasn't mentioned the death penalty yet, right? Whether or not they're going to go forward. Are they pursuing it? Is it a bargaining chip? In other words, DA, would you possibly consider a plea deal, or do you want to take this to trial? And DA Hochman told me that David is free to make an offer. We'll see what happens. That's all we have for you right now.
For now, the case moves to trial with the outcome very much undecided. Subscribe so you don't miss how this develops, and we'll keep tracking every hearing as it happens.